to start off, can you tell me a little bit about yourself and Asylum Entertainment? Where are you guys located? How big's the team? What's its composition?
Okay, I'll let John start.
Yeah, we're located in Ottawa, Canada. So we have an office here with just about like half a dozen people. It's not a very big office, and then all of our art is, well, not all, but for the most part, it's all produced remotely. So we have like our core people here. Actually, our lead programmer's in Sweden too. So we're kind of spread out a little bit. But yeah, we have the studio here in Ottawa. And I mean, we come from, well, I mean, my history in the gaming industry goes back a bit further. Like I used to work for a company called Star Vault, making an MMORPG with them way back in the day. I used to work for Curse, if you have heard of them, and then following that, we started up Motown. Sean and I here. We were two of the three founders for the Arma mod called Altus Life, and that exploded. So really, after working on that for a while, we just kind of got to the point where we couldn't really do any more inside the Arma engine. So it was time to take the concept and step it up a few notches and come out and actually make a standalone game that does it all a little bit better. And that's where we are now.
Wow,
Yeah.
that's awesome.
Yeah, and I'm the team art producer and director, and yeah, I'm responsible for all the 3D artwork and textures and anything art related that you saw there in the town square, for better or worse. But I'm responsible for that.
And that's everything from the 3D modeling to the characters, all that's you?
I'm not the one that made those specifically, but I directed their creation.
Ah, I see. So what's the total team size, roughly?
It fluctuates a lot on the art side of things, really. It's pretty stable on the other sides, but usually we're around a dozen or so.
Yeah, we have people come and go with artists because they're freelancers. So they work per task, and then when they're done, depending on how satisfied we are, we either hire them again for another task or try to find someone that fits our need. So just to clarify, what you just saw there was the first of 3 modules, and none of the 3 modules are the actual game. They're like previews of content. The first module being like a PlayStation Home sort of module where you can socialize and chat with people and perform in a few activities like karaoke and the movie theater and the art gallery.
I see. So what effectively you're doing is it's kind of following. I don't want to say exactly, but it's similar to the methodology that Star Citizen is using.
Absolutely, and like I would be lying if I said that wasn't part of the inspiration for why we wanted to do this. But there is a reason behind it too, because we're familiar with early access models that a lot of games go for on Steam, and we also understood that a lot of those games have one first impression. Throwing out an early access game is a good way to make money really quickly, but we didn't want to blow our first impression doing that right away. Instead, we wanted to use these modules as the impression that our players would get before going into beta later, after all 3 modules are released, and then showing them once the beta is mostly feature complete.
So what were the motivations behind this? You mentioned Altus being the team's first kind of game as a team, and later it turned into this because you felt you were limited. Why a life mod?
Yeah, that's a really interesting story too. I mean, actually, it's a really long story, so I'll try to be brief. But we with creating Identity. We were originally going to create a full Arma 3 mod, like Arma 3 Life, but they beat us to the punch. And so we decided, let's go all the way. Let's make a full game ourselves and do something that hasn't already been done, because those guys already did it first. So that's what Identity started out as. It was just myself and John at first. He was a programmer. I'm an artist. And, it was a good starting combination. Of course, it wasn't enough to really go all the way, so we have recruited people along the road.
So you mentioned that there's going to be the 3 modules piecewise, and then there's going to be additional content kind of coming along the way. Um, does that infer that these other modules are being developed in unison? Are they or in parallel? Is the rest of the game currently in development, and or is it module and then full game?
Well, it's parallel a bit. I mean, obviously, some resources are going into one than the others, but everything is getting little bits and pieces at a time. The bulk of it going into the time spent on this module, of course.
And like you said about the town square too, is the most important part there is as we're developing this, we're building the entire back end that drives the entire game. So it's not really just town square we've been making over the last few years. We've been building an MMO, you know what I mean? And that's a big task on its own.
Exactly. And our developer files, if you were to download them, are somewhere around 150 gigabytes of data that you'd have to download. But when you package that in the engine, you notice that you're only downloading about 15 gigabytes. It only uses the data that is being used in this level that you're playing. So a lot of people are going to be like, well, what happened to the other 120 gigabytes of data like that we were supposed to download? I mean, it's there, it's just not being referenced in memory with this module when it's packaged.
Yeah, people find their ways into those files, so it's better if they're not there.
So you touched a little bit upon the player count. You said theoretically up to 4 digits. Now, are we talking are we really talking 1,000 players? Is that in the entire world? Because I was sort of under the impression, and I think a lot of people were, that when Identity eventually gets released, there'll be like public servers, and then there'll be private servers, similar to how ARMA roleplay servers and communities function today. Is that not the case, or is it some massive one?
That is the case. So the way it works is that you won't be just downloading a dedicated server and firing it up to run a community server. You'll have to rent it through us, because these are not like simple dedicated servers or clusters, right? If you have, so they're really heavy duty. They actually run on the Google Cloud. And when you rent a server from us, you'll be able to host hundreds of people on there, theoretically. I mean, when I say theoretically 4 digits, that's because the technology should be able to go there. But that doesn't mean that we necessarily want that many, because really what it's about is finding the nice balance for the size of the world.
So you mentioned clusters. So I'm assuming sections of the map, maybe instance sections of the map. For example, I imagine the player housing is probably instanced and whatnot.
Yep.
And then
different servers will handle different parts of the map. Yeah.
I see.
And it goes even deeper. We can actually have different things on different servers, even in the same spot. Like we can have wildlife in the forest on a different server than the person standing right beside it.
Yeah, so even if that server crashes with the wildlife, the only thing that goes down is the AI for the animals, but you can still run around even when the animals are dead.
I'm actually glad you touched on AI. That is something that is kind of new in the roleplay community, specifically with games like GTA Roleplay, where the AI kind of generate extra immersion, right? It makes the city feel more alive. Has there been any thought or discussion in regards to, you mentioned animal AI, but potentially NPCs who are just walking around?
Yeah, we've had a lot of thought there. It's just we've come to the conclusion that we can go 2 ways with that, with our technology. See, when you're talking GTRP, their player count is pretty low, and all the ambient life around you plays a part in that. And given that our back end and all the work we've done here, we can we're not going to get those numbers, but we can essentially get a more immersive environment by making sure that when you run into somebody, he's a real person and a potential threat. He's not just some dumb thing bumping around, right?
We personally prefer it that way because we feel it is more immersive when everybody you encounter is an actual person that controlling a character. I mean, obviously there are still AI, like the drug dealer, the people standing behind counters inside of stores, and they're there to provide information like if you want to join the police force, obviously we can't fully rely on a player to be there at all times to make sure that you can sign up for the police force. So there's an NPC to handle that encounter.
So in other words, NPCs that are immobile would be a thing, but mobile, I guess, active simulated NPCs are unlikely.
No, except for animals, yeah.
Yeah, that's the thing. Animals, like hunting, is a big part of this too. So if you're out in the woods and there's deer walking around, they actually have simulated AI. Like they're not just wandering randomly. They have things in mind that they're looking for, like food or shelter or something like that.
They're like a fox will be looking for a rabbit to eat, and then when you kill the fox, it's the meat from the rabbit will actually be found on its corpse.
And another thing that's cool too is that in most games, the way it works in an MMO is that AI kind of like goes into sleep mode when no one's near it, right? So it's not actually doing anything. But with us, what we're doing is we actually have these other servers that can do calculations around the clock. So even if no one's within a kilometer of it, that deer is still walking through the woods doing its thing. And what's cool about that is that means when you do come into the forest, if you're hunting, you can track it. Like there would literally be tracks and dung and stuff in the ground, and you can actually follow its path, find it, and hunt it. So I mean, it opens up a lot of doors.
What the curiosity that I have is when I look at the traditional community servers that are run by various individuals, they tend to have a couple things in common. They'll have a certain vibe going from them, right? A certain set of rules, a certain set of storylines that may be taking place. In other words, what is allowed in one community is not necessarily allowed on another one. So that draws in the question of how are these public servers going to be managed, especially with all these players? What's sort of preventing somebody who's unable to join a private community when they go onto the public server? What's preventing them from taking a gun and shooting someone in the face just because they feel like
it? Yeah. Okay. So we do have a system designed for this purpose, an anti-griefing measure called a stress system. And what the stress system dictates is like it has a lot of different factors involved, but it can factor in whether you're in a city where you're not stressed at all, or whether you're out in the middle of the wilderness, maybe where people are growing illegal narcotics, where you will be really stressed. And the higher your stress on an official server, the less damage you'll take from
No, the other way around.
Wait.
The higher your stress,
the higher your stress, the more damage. Sorry, and the lower your stress, because you're not stressed at all, the less damage you'll take.
And it's not just environmental either. Environment's one piece of it, but there's actual actions that can trigger stress as well.
Yeah, like pointing a gun at somebody.
Yeah. Now the thing is too, if you pull your gun on somebody, his stress is going to rise fairly quickly because there's a gun pointing at his face. But yours, as soon as you pull that out, you are maxed out. So that means by pulling out your gun, you're making yourself vulnerable. And the purpose of this is there's different ways that guy could react in that situation. He could decide to pull out his gun and try and outshoot you, in which case one of you is probably going to die pretty quick. He could run, which is going to make him more vulnerable faster, running away from a gun pointing at his back. Or he can surrender, which will decrease his stress, make him safe, but also make him vulnerable to being robbed.
Interesting.
And also note that private servers can disable this functionality too. So they're not forced to use the stress system if they don't want to deal with safe zones, a low stress situation.
Oh, I'm sorry. So this is something that would happen in a safe zone, but not necessarily out in the open?
Oh, sorry. I mean, like if you're really low on stress, then if you're not stressed at all, you're obviously
safe zone of the stress meter.
Yeah. Yes.
Gotcha.
There are. That said, however, we do have these social gathering locations. An example would be like the art gallery that you saw in the town square, where players can enter. And in certain building interiors, it is completely safe to be in there. Nobody can pull out a gun. Obviously, places like a schoolhouse, we don't want to like any simulated school shootings inside of Identity.
Right.
What happens there is when you walk through the door of these areas, you're going to know because there will be a metal detector that confiscates your gun, and then you get it again when you leave. So,
Mm.
Yeah.
so
Yeah,
there's
there's a metal detector,
secure
yeah.
areas, but they're only in cities. They're only in social areas. There's none that are going to come into play if
In the
PvP is on the
yeah,
mind.
no, people running from the cops can't run into these places. People in combat with other players can't run into these places to get safe. That you have to be out of combat to be able to enter these
Yeah.
places safe.
What sort of factions do you see are going to be present in this game? Cops, maybe EMS? Are gangs something you create? Are these things designed out yet? And if so, could you elaborate on these factions a little bit?
Yeah, sure. So gangs are just one of the social structures. There's quite a few, but each one has sort of a different functionality attached to it.
Mm-hmm.
And gangs are essentially they're they're really for the people that want to get into criminal activities together with their friends. So you
Mm-hmm.
have gang wars. Gang wars is one part of it. I would say is not even one of the big parts of it, but it's still pretty fun.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Also, the cartel system. If you want to control drugs in the world, there are cartels that you can take control of, and that kind of works in sort of like it's hard to describe, almost like a battlefield esque kind of PvP capture area.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and I mean, gangs are required for all these things because the gangs have their own HQ that they can designate where all of the people gain public access, or shared access, I should say, inside there. Um, and things like cartels actually have rewards that can come back to the gang as a whole.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, in addition to that, like police is a huge part of our game.
Mm-hmm.
There's a lot of attention going into there, and the way it's structured is it's sort of like a progression tree.
Mm-hmm.
And this applies to all careers, by the way. Careers being things like police, EMS, firefighting. Those are three careers right now.
Mm-hmm.
And each one of those has its own progression tree. So, as a cop, you're going to start off, being a regular patrol officer. As you move up, you can become things like a detective or SWAT or that sort of thing. So, you can
Mm-hmm.
actually progress in each area and gain, um, I guess I say perks in each field and gain access to different equipment and different actions. So, there is a whole progression tree in that.
Yeah, and on the flip side of that, there's also like content for civilian players too that just don't want to get involved in the combat or PvP. That just want to live life
Mm-hmm.
as safe as they can. We have corporations. We
Mm-hmm.
have a number of corporations. You can be in both a gang and a corporation at the same time, but you kind of think of gangs as like the criminal guild or clan, and
Yeah.
corporations as sort of like the civilian guild or clan. And so the corporation, the person that creates it can choose from a number of different variety of options. They can um, they could become like a trucking company where they can move supplies across the map from point A to point B
Mm-hmm.
between different distribution centers. They can be a taxi corporation, or like where they can own taxi cabs and compete with other taxi services, or kind of like an Uber system built into the game. Or they can own public transport buses and stuff like that at higher like progression levels.
Yeah.
So
Well, I was just gonna say, like, what really makes corporations something cool, though, is that, like, in real life, a corporation can own assets. So,
Mm-hmm.
say you want to make some money, transporting goods around. You can do that on a bicycle, but it's going to be things like pizza. You're not going to make much money, but you're going to need bigger vehicles to move bigger packages and make more money. When
Right.
you get into the big vehicles, the big trucks, the semis, and that sort of thing,
Mm-hmm.
they're really, really expensive. And because of that, you're probably not going to be able to get one of your own right off. So what you can do, and actually in this case, that particular item is actually restricted to corporations, but
Mm-hmm.
the idea is that um, you can join a corporation, use their assets,
Mm.
and
Right.
build up some
like
money, and
the
that that
the
corporation will make money off your work.
So you're
exactly,
effectively
yeah.
generating. Not only can you do your, so you have a reason. You have a effectively you can use it as a front for your back end business.
Yeah,
From the
yeah.
sound of it. Ah, I see. So
And there's also a third corporation, there's manufacturing corporation or crafting
mhm.
corporation, as you might know it as. Uh, where you as the corporation members will be producing all of the content you see in the game, whether that be guns or furniture, or maybe vehicles, or any sort of item, food, items in the game that you can obtain and trade with other players. They produce the content, s- sell it to the distribution centers, like an auction house, like a World of Warcraft auction house kind of, and small businesses will purchase the content for like the auction house is kind of like a for the small businesses to get their inventory supplies from, and then they can sell those items on their store shelves to players.
In regards to the factions, we have we have the corporations, we have the gangs, we have pretty much all the bad guys. We've got the good guys. What about like judges, government officials, mayors? Is that something that has been thought about, or do you believe it's kind of outside the scope? And if it is outside the scope of, let's say, the public servers, would a private server be able to create these systems themselves?
Those are entirely in the scope. They're already being worked on. So,
Oh, awesome.
well, specifically the legal system, there's no judges that are player controlled, but there's juries and there's so you can actually the legal corporation is one of the existing 4 corporation types that we have. So you can actually form a legal corporation and advertise it. And if you get a good reputation, whenever someone's in prison, if they want to try and get it early, they can initiate a trial. And it's going to randomly select people from all over the place to report in as a jury member, and they get paid for attending to. And then essentially what happens is the lawyer gets a chance to speak for his client, and if he gets him off, then he gets the paycheck. So but it really comes down to the jury. But I mean, we did something similar to this at a much lower level on Altus Life, and it was hilarious, the stories that people come up with being in
Some
prison.
people are just really good public speakers, when they,
Yeah.
and that's really why the lawyer system exists, because we some people either don't have a microphone or not are not very good talkers, so they might want to hire legal counsel to speak on their behalf,
Yep.
and
Yeah, we always found that people with the most hilarious story probably had the better chances of getting off.
yeah, and we really anticipate that some people in the community that are really good at this will become quite popular for their skills, and that's what we're hoping for anyway.
Yeah. The other thing you brought up too was government, and there is a governor position. We haven't really extended out into mayors and that sort of thing yet. It's something we might do, but the governor is guaranteed, and they have control over taxes and laws and that sort of thing. So we give them incentive to be corrupt essentially too, but it's democratic, so they can go corrupt if they want, but they'll probably never get back in office.
Well, thank you, my man. I'm gonna go grab some food myself, and hope to see you soon, my dude.
Yeah, thank you, everybody. It was great to do this for everybody. I can't wait to see you in Identity in the town square. Thank you to you and your posse for helping us throughout the week. Some of you guys logged in over the past 7 days to help us find bugs, and we're incredibly grateful for all of that. All the help you provided, helping push this interview along, and just thank you so much. I can't wait to do it again.
Absolutely, man. It's been a pleasure. Take care, my dude.
Yeah, thank you. Take care. Bye, everyone.